Hello, Southwest Florida homeowners and homebuyers. Welcome to the 239 Real Estate Roundtable Podcast, your go-to source for navigating the vibrant real estate landscape of our beautiful region. I'm your host, Kevin Tremmel, a local real estate agent, leader, and investor here in Southwest Florida. On this podcast, we bring you insights from best in the business, top-notch real estate professionals, seasoned agents, and experts in everything from homeowners insurance to mortgages, maintenance, and repairs. Whether you're a first-time homebuyer or a seasoned homeowner, we've got you covered with tips, strategies, and valuable insights to make your journey in Southwest Florida's real estate market a breeze. Get ready to unlock the doors to successful home ownership. This is the 239 Real Estate Roundtable Podcast, where we demystify the process, share insider knowledge, and ensure you're well equipped to make informed decisions. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the 239 Real Estate Roundtable Podcast. Today, we have Leona Newell. She is currently a real estate agent at LPT Realty. She's also a real estate coach. She's also been a team leader, and she's had a very successful career in corporate HR spanning over 30 years. Welcome to the show, Leona.
Kevin, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for making the time. I know we're all busy, but appreciate you coming on today. And why don't we start how we usually do on this podcast? Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your real estate story? How did you get into real estate and why?
Absolutely. So I originally am from New England and moved here to Florida in 2015 with my husband. Prior to moving here, I have about 30 years in corporate America, as you mentioned, human resources, helping small startup businesses grow their businesses. And during that time frame, I also dabbled in real estate. I managed a RE/MAX office up in New England for a bit, so I got that feel of what real estate was all about and really liked it. So over the years, dabbled with purchasing homes, renting homes, being an investor. And then in 2020, decided after doing some coaching with some real estate agents here in Florida, realizing that in order to get paid, I needed to have my real estate license. So I decided to get my real estate license so that I could get paid, and realized this is not a bad profession to be in. And with my HR experience, felt that it was really going to be beneficial for me to really be successful in my career path here as a realtor. So in 2020, got my license, still was doing some coaching with some agents and doing some other HR consulting as well at the time, but started my real estate business. Went to a small brokerage in Bradenton and learned a lot from that broker. Did a lot of buy consultations and helping people find their homes versus the selling side, but I did sell a few homes. And then as my career has built, I've done a lot of both selling and buying, and I love helping my customers. That's one of the reasons why I did get into real estate, is I love helping people. I have a passion for that. So whether it's coaching new agents or buying and selling, all of that is what I do. I left corporate America latter part of 2020, and I've been doing real estate full time and no looking back. My husband and I came from New England. As I said, we were sick of those winters that were there. Being in Florida, we're able to drive our sports cars around and every day of the year pretty much without having to worry about the snow. So that's my background.
Awesome. Cool. And when you said you had to get your license to get paid while you were coaching, you just mean because like in Florida, you're really not allowed to do anything real estate related without a license. That's what you meant, right? So even though you were only quote unquote coaching, you just had to have a license because you were talking, real estate to other people and clients and that kind of stuff. Is that?
Yeah, it's that here in Florida, like you said, we can't really get paid from a deal unless we are an agent. So at that closing table, that's considered a referral from someone for me to get paid for helping and supporting them in that real estate transaction. In addition, it's being a product of the product and really truly understanding if I'm going to coach people in real estate, I need to understand all of the ins and outs of it. And there's a lot. It's crazy. What I did find out in doing that was going to the school and learning what real estate is all about. Those classes, the real estate courses, teach you how to pass the exam. but not how to actually do this job, what it entails, all the different facets of this business. There's so much of it, and it can be frustrating. It's not just showing beautiful homes, it's working with a customer from the beginning of the transaction to the end of the transaction and beyond to make sure that everything is smooth, make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. It's working with really good vendors, lenders, closing companies, attorneys that do closings as well, inspection companies. So there's a lot of that goes into this that I don't think people really understand when they take that course and then pass the exam and then they go, oh my God, now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the course, it's mostly like a law course, right? But as we all know, the most important thing in real estate and probably every sales job, but it's leads, right? And then without leads, there's nothing. And I feel like the real estate course does a very poor job at just scratching the surface even of like lead gen, right? What and why and different methods and like all that stuff. And it's more of how do you not land in real estate jail, as they say, right? With the
Yes.
so it's more of that rather than, like you said, how to build a business. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because when that's one thing I'm realizing too, like when I started General, is you are an accountant, right? You're managing funds, you're a marketing expert, you're an administrative, making sure everything, like you said, I's are dotted and T's are crossed, with contracts have to be uploaded to your broker's preferred system and every compliance and that. And then, of course, you're in sales. So you just wear like so many different hats on a daily basis that, it can definitely be overwhelming, which I guess brings me to my next question. You being so experienced in corporate HR and advising small businesses, entrepreneurs, that must have been pretty helpful when you started your new venture in real estate, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, how has that helped you, and what skills did you already have that you implemented?
Yeah. So absolutely, it was a huge help for me because I had that business acumen of understanding how businesses are run and being able to set up systems within my own business, because systems are really important to track how your business is going, track goals. Are you halfway through the year taking a look at, have I met, where am I? Have I met my goal already? How far off am I? So that you can adjust and reset those to be able to move forward. So a lot of that was very helpful. I think the biggest aspect, though, really was communicating with people, really understanding how people work and operate, to be able to talk with them and listen. Because at the end of the day, this is their journey to buy a home. So you need to be able to listen and understand how to identify what's important to them and get them to that right place. A lot of people don't really listen. A lot of my customers that I get have already been through 2 or 3 agents who have told me, you're the first agent that has actually listened to what I had to say and put me in a house that was what we were looking for as a family in an area. You cared about some of the things that I didn't even think about. So it's also thinking ahead and understanding, here's what they're saying, but here's some additional aspects of what they need to be looking toward. They may be new to this area and never been here, so they may not understand all the different facets. Every state is different, and Florida definitely has its concerns for people with hurricanes and insurance and all of that over the years. But being in that corporate business world, I think it just gave me a different level of confidence and professionalism that a lot of people may not have.
Yeah.
So in my coaching, that's definitely something that I teach people. How do you talk to people? How do you present yourself? How do you document things? Documentation is so key in any transaction. Like you said, uploading all of those documents that you have and making sure the I's are dotted, T's are crossed from a compliance perspective, because that real estate jail is easy to get into.
Yeah, and I love what you said. I think you brought up a very important point, and that's something we always harped on when I was a sales manager for a builder: listening. Maybe there's a reason why humans have 2 ears and one mouth, right?
Exactly.
And most people think sales is a talking job, but it's actually a listening and asking question job, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just such an important point, I think, that a lot of people miss. You're not here to talk 15 minutes and sell somebody something. You're here to listen and ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And then sometimes give hard answers too. I think that's also something that sets good agents apart. Like I see so many agents where it's month number 3, right? And you've been on 15 tours with your buyers and you're just chasing that unicorn that doesn't exist, right? That 4-bedroom pool home in Collier County under 300, right? That just doesn't exist, like, or whatever it may be, right? And sometimes I feel like that's also our job to just, that's also what we're here for. That's why people call us, because we're supposed to be experts, right? So then got to tell them, hey, we either got to up our budget or adjust our expectations because this ain't happening. Same with, I feel like sellers right now, that's a big thing, right?
Yeah.
Listen to their mom, dad, uncles, whatever it may be. You know, they sold their home 2 years ago at the peak of the market for $100,000 more than what it's worth today. And that's just our job to open the eyes. And I think we talked about this before. Data, right, is hugely important. No one's going to argue with some solid data. But speaking of 2 years ago and markets, and I know you entered real estate the year of COVID, so that must have been interesting. But what kind of market trends are you seeing in your community and in the area that you service?
Yeah, so since the pandemic and the rise of people paying outrageous prices and skipping inspections and all of that craziness, which, trust me, I don't agree with the skipping inspections at any point in time because that is so valuable to any home purchase. But where we are today from that, I'm seeing things starting to normalize again. We may not be at the pre-pandemic low that we had, but we are definitely normalizing the pricing here in this North Port Charlotte, Punta Gorda, Englewood area, including Venice. We're in a buyer's market here. We've been in a buyer's market for a bit. And basically what that means for people who don't quite understand seller's market, buyer's markets, really is that buyers now have an advantage over sellers due to the amount of inventory that's on the market. So they get to be a little more picky and can take their time in making that offer out there to someone, or not going in at full price and coming a little bit lower to have a little bit more negotiation room there. In the pandemic time, it was best and highest final by 5 o'clock, and it went on the market at 9 that morning. So people were offering over 100,000 for things just to be able to get them. We had acceleration clauses in our contracts. That became the norm, to have that accelerator clause, which basically is, I will pay $1,000 more up to this dollar amount so that I get that deal over someone else. The cash buyers were huge at that point. So at this point, leveling out a little bit, normalizing, we're seeing prices coming down, being a little bit more realistic for people, meaning here in Northwood, I think homes in that time frame were well over 400, 500,000, which was unheard of prior to the pandemic. Right now, an average home here in Northport is running about 375. The average days on market in that time frame were 1 or less. 3 days, I think, was long. Now we're at about 90 days on the market.
Wow. Okay.
So that stretch is definitely there. And that's about what it was pre-pandemic, honestly. We have about 850 homes, active homes right now in Northport, with every 5 days, about 30 to 35 more are coming on. So more and more people, they're still in the market. They're still selling. It's just where that playing field is lengthened, that more so than what it was. And again, that buyer's market versus the seller's market.
Yeah. I think that's almost everywhere. I have some business in Collier County, Naples area, and that seems to still be a little bit stronger, higher price point. So it's shifting for sure, but it held on way longer and it's shifting slower.
Yeah.
versus down here in, I know you're more up north, like Northport area, but like Cape Coral
Yeah.
hit really hard. Well, also due to the hurricane, I think a lot of people are just, they were waiting for FEMA flood maps to get redrawn. Like, where does everything end up? And then that a lot of building boom, obviously. So there's a lot of supply now in Cape, and they've been hit pretty hard. I know that. But
Yeah.
which brings me to a follow-up question, and just want to mention to everybody, a full disclaimer, obviously this is just our personal opinion and nobody has a crystal
Oh,
ball. What do you
absolutely.
looks like next week? If we talk again in a week, we should have a favorable Federal Reserve interest rate cuts based on everything. Where do you see everything going over the next like 12 months, right? Let's say they cut rates next week. Fast forward 12 months, like if we have this conversation again, like where are we at, you think?
Yeah. And again, like you said, this is just our opinion of the research that we do. We're working with our lenders to kind of hear what their opinions are as well. That's a very interesting question, because when the rates are really low, the prices tend to go higher.
Yeah.
When the rates are high, the prices tend to come down. It's that buying power that someone has. So with the rates hopefully coming down to a reasonable number now for people, I think buyers are going to take notice of that and really start to pick up. We're heading into the holidays here. November, December is usually a very low time frame for people to be purchasing homes because they don't want to move during the holidays. But I think if these rates do come down, the pricing stays about where it is, maybe up a little bit, we may see some uptick in purchases coming. That's just my opinion. This year has just been interesting. We were slow in the beginning, and then we started to pick up. And in the past month or so, we've seen this uptick of sales happening, which is really cool. We love that. But we're also in an election year. And I think that has, not to talk politics, but I think that has an impact on the real estate world, where prices are coming down, rates are fluctuating. I think in the next year, we will see some reductions in the rates. I think the Fed's promise of, what was it, 3 to 5 drops this year didn't happen. I don't know why they made that comment that they were going to do that, because I think they've made two of them, or this will be the second one major. So it is going to be interesting, but I do see, if the rates continue to come down, prices may go up a little bit, but I think that it's just going to be a better market. I think we're going to be in a better place next year. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm kind of getting the feeling right now there's this huge uptick in supply and inventory, which obviously reduces the prices. Demand has, I mean, people that really need to buy are buying, but which I think now is actually a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, was actually a perfect time to buy, because the rate cut was still like far away. So like you could really get, like, demand was super low relatively. So you could really get some good deals. Now, like you said, there's been an uptick in sales because the rates have already dropped a little, because the market's already like anticipating it. And sure enough, boom, like sales go up, like competition gets stiffer if you're a buyer, right? But same thing. I think rates dropping, it's just going to unlock everything a little bit, right? Like when you follow, NAR, they say around like 5%, right? That's when the whole real estate market gets unlocked, where like sellers that are locked in a 3%, 4% interest rate, now they're all of a sudden also willing to sell again. And then buyers are willing to buy again. So it's just kind of unfreeze the whole market. Right now, sellers that absolutely have to sell are selling, but the ones that are at 3-4% are still not selling. So there's still relatively low inventory, combined with like very little demand on the buyer side because rates are so it's just, so hopefully next year will be a great real estate year for everybody, not just how 2020 and beyond was. It's just nice for the sellers, but it sucks for the buyers. Hopefully it'll be like a nice balance between everybody. So
I think it will balance out, because we've already seen that bit of a balance right now. So I think that as long as agents are educating their sellers and educating their buyers, I think things should be a little less crazy. Not that I don't ever want to see that crazy market where people were, selling high, but it's just unrealistic. People who overpaid their price, the value of their home today is not there. So they're going to lose money if they need to sell their home. And that's not good. We don't want that. So that balanced market really is what I'm hopeful for 2025 and beyond. And, we don't want to see things go so low that people are forced to sell their home or just not have that value in their home anymore. That's not good either. So in between is what I'm hoping for, because I think then we'll just have some really good competitive markets to be in where buyers can buy a home and get a loan and not be so over budget that they're scraping to be able to pay those bills every month. That's not healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And then let's switch gears for a second. So you work with a lot of buyers. There's been a very big change that happened on August 17th of this year, 2024, that is. Why don't you give us your opinion on it? How I know it's probably a little too soon to tell, but kind of how has it impacted your business already? I think that's what a lot of people are waiting for. I think a lot of agents, they know what it's all about. And I feel like not by now, also a lot of clients know what it's about. But I think what's interesting is how will it actually affect everybody in practice. So maybe you can shed some light, what have you seen? How has it kind of impacted your business? And what are you worried about it? Are you excited about it? Do you see it as an opportunity?
Sure. First with that, yes, there was some significant changes in the real estate world, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen and heard with the NAR settlement that has impacted real estate. There's a lot of misconception as well. So first, I want to address the biggest misconception out there around compensation and the fact that it has always been negotiable, always, and always will be negotiable. So when people say, oh, well, the standard is this and the standard is that, there is no standard. Unfortunately, agents kind of fall into that bandwagon of, hey, this agent's doing that and that agent's doing that, so we're going to do that too. That's just, what happens, I think, in any industry. I don't think it was intentional, but always been negotiable, will continue to be negotiable. But there were definitely some changes for both buyers and for sellers. And the biggest impact, I think, was around, and the purpose of this whole thing is just being transparent from the start, because I think people felt that transparency was not there, talking with your seller, talking with your buyer. So I believe that was the whole crux of this settlement, was that transparency, helping both your buyer and your seller understand how compensation is actually being handled now and moving forward, as well as the roles and responsibilities of both the agent and the client. So on the seller side, there's agent responsibilities and seller responsibilities. And on the buyer side, there's agent responsibilities and buyer responsibilities. So from a seller's side, the changes that happened were commissions used to be in the MLS. So an agent would be able to look at a home and say, okay, I'm getting X% of this deal. Great. The seller side here in Florida has typically paid the buyer agent commission at the closing table. NAR settled to say we will take that commission out of the MLS, the multiple listing system. So no longer can that be visible for anybody to have access to. So from a seller's perspective, all of our agreements have changed. We've got new agreements, updated agreements on both sides. We've got new agreements that we've never had before, new documents, new forms. And on the seller side now, it's here's how much you're going to pay me, Mr. Home Seller, to list and market your home. In addition, we've decoupled how that works from our commission as a listing agent to a buyer agent. And it doesn't mean that the seller doesn't pay commissions anymore. It just means that now it's more negotiable. Now we can, we need to explain what their options are. So now they have a choice. I think too often agents were saying, this is just how it's done and here's how it's going to work. And I think that was part of the problem with the seller side. Well, what do you mean I've got to pay that much? Isn't that negotiable? I get pushback all the time from sellers saying, I don't want to pay that much. Well, now it's, here's what your options are. You can pay this, you can pay this. Whatever's in that agreement really is what the expectation is going to be. On the buyer side, the buyers now, in order to actually work with, and what I mean by work with is have a buyer's agent show them properties, negotiate deals with them, make an offer. They now need to sign an agreement, just like a listing agent does to list the home. A buyer now needs to sign a buyer agent agreement with the buyer agent in order to exclusively work with that listing, with that buyer agent. So that was not really a thing before. Some states it was a requirement, but here in Florida it was not. So from that perspective, that's a big change for a buyer's agent. For me personally, that's no different. I have my buyer consultations. I make sure they understand what the expectation is. I understand what their expectations are. Now we just sign an agreement to that. But inside that agreement, there is a compensation aspect. So we have to communicate with them what their potential financial obligation is going to be. My goal is to get them the best deal possible on a home to purchase and to negotiate that the listing agent is going to pay my commission so they don't have to. But if the listing agent, if I sign that agreement with my buyer at 3%, say that they're willing to pay me 3% for my services, because my services aren't free. That's one of the misconceptions. We don't work for free, especially when it's your profession. I'm going to try and get that 3% from the listing side, but I may not. So if they're willing to pay 2%, my agreement with my buyer is 3%. My buyer's responsibility financially to me is that 1%. Now, I can modify my agreement with them and say, I'm satisfied with the 2%. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to make you pay that. In some cases, the loan they're taking may not allow for that as well. So there's a lot of intricacies with this to really understand. And there's a lot of education going on that we need to really understand so that we can communicate and be very transparent with our buyer and our seller. But the key thing I think with this is that transparency, knowing that the percentages cannot be in any MLS or anything that is tied to the MLS. We now have to have those conversations amongst agents. Hey, is your seller offering buyer agent commission? And that's where you start that conversation. Either they're going to say, yes, I'm splitting my commission from broker to broker, or yes, my seller is going to pay this percentage, or nope, they're not paying anything. Yeah. Okay, well, then you got to go back and talk to your buyer and have that transparent conversation of here's what they're offering, here's what our agreement is, and make a decision, modify your agreement if necessary. Talk about the fact that they may not be offering anything. Here's what that's going to mean if we move forward. You can get it in seller concessions. We can say, hey, we want X amount of seller concessions. And then the buyer can then pay part of that commission that way. So there's a lot of change. We're navigating all of these changes right now because it is so new. And there is still a ton of misconception around where you can put compensation. I still see agents putting it in the realtor remarks in MLS, and those are huge fines. There are fines now for us to be doing that. Don't do it. Have the conversation, be transparent with both sides. I know there's been a time where we couldn't get a hold of agents at all because they were just like, just send us an offer. Don't worry about it. Those times are gone. We have to have those discussions as agents. And our job is to do the best job that we can and get the best possible deal for our customer, whether it's the seller or the buyer. So having those discussions, communication is key. Education is key. It's educating your consumer, your client. It's educating yourself. I think there's a lot of things still trying to navigate through. I think there's a lot of new forms that the MLS is putting out because they're still learning, hey, that didn't work. Now we need to do this. I think it's going to take about 6 months to kind of get through all of this before we truly understand how this is going to look and whether or not it's really going to stick. It's a tough one. It's a tough one, but there's an impact on both sides, all sides, the consumer, the agent. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. I was going to ask, does your MLS allow to advertise seller concessions? So not, because I know you have a different MLS up there than we do down here. And ours actually, there's no box yet where you can check seller concessions, not commissions, but concessions being offered, yes or no. And I've seen some MLSs, like I have a buddy up north, different state, and he actually has a box where it says seller concessions offered, yes, no. Ours does not yet. Does yours?
So I'm with Stellar MLS, which is a good portion of the state of Florida. We initially had those boxes and people were not appropriately inputting information there because it was check the box, yes, and then it was another line that you could explain what it was. People were putting in seller offering 3% or putting a percentage there. So what Stellar did as of August 27th, so let me just back up a second. August 6th was when all of these new settlement changes went into effect for my MLS, not the 17th, the 6th. Yeah. So as of August 27th, they took those concessions out of the MLS because it was just getting too confusing for agents, not really knowing how to navigate that one component. What they did say that we could do is in the realtor remarks, we can talk about seller concessions, still no compensation, but we can explain the seller concession. Yeah. Seller is offering seller concessions at closing, and you can put a $5,000 seller concession, whatever it might be. My personal opinion on that is just say that seller's offering concessions, talk to agent for more details. Yeah. Don't get yourself in trouble and start putting numbers in there because that can be misconstrued. And we know that those attorneys that brought those lawsuits to the table for the sellers out in the country here are watching. You know, let's be smart. Less is more.
Yeah. And I think just having a box, that's a little below you and my pay grade. It's not like you and I are going to change this, but personally, I think just if the MLS would have like just a box, yes, no, concessions offered, yes, no, no option for a good amount, I think that would be like a very good middle ground, because then it kind of gets the objective going of the settlement. It sparks the conversation, right? Because then buyer's agent emails or calls or texts and says, hey, how much and what and if, right? And then like, but it gets that conversation going, because now I feel like right now, and I want your opinion on this, back to the question with what trends you've seen, but I've seen like before people even schedule a showing on one of my listings, they will email me and say, hey, is your buyer offering compensation or concessions? And so far, my buyers have understood and we offer it. I feel that's kind of also, then what if we say no? Then you're not going to show this listing because you're not like, then that also defeats the purpose of doing like the best service for your client, because what are you going to tell your buyer? Oh, I guess you would have to tell them like, hey, we can still see it, but they're not paying anything. Right. And then I guess but that's the whole point, right? Because then they probably wouldn't see that listing. And then you gotta, as a seller, or you as a real listing agent, first of all, gotta explain to your seller, hey, you're risking not really that much exposure on your property, which brings me to my point. I also don't think that like this whole settlement will change how the money is actually flowing. I do think there will be transparency, which I think that's what they wanted, conversation and transparency. But I think at the end of the day, sellers 95% of the time are still going to pay for the commission, because like you're not really going to get that many showings, especially if you're like in a first-time homebuyer market, right? Like, what first-time homebuyer is going to view your listing if they have to already pay high rates, high prices, closing costs, and their buyer's agent's commission? Like, they're just not going to look at your listing. That's just my
Right. Yeah, as we are not supposed to not show a listing just because there isn't compensation there.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. If you have to listen to your customer, and if the customer says, look, I know we signed a BBA together, and I know my financial responsibility may be X, but you told me you were going to do everything you can to get the other side to pay it. And if they're saying they're not going to, I'm not going to see that house. There's not much we can do about that. Get that in writing, document it. Documentation is really key. At the end of the day, they've signed a legal binding contract with us, the BBA, that they're agreeing to pay a percentage or a flat fee or whatever it is. And that's when you have to, I believe, have a really great rapport with the lenders that are out there. I have some great lenders that I work with that I always recommend my buyers to communicate with and maybe hopefully work with in order to get their mortgage done. And the lender and I are going to talk all the time. Before I make an offer, I talk to them and say, hey, here's the offer we want to make. Do you see any red flags with this offer? And we talk about that. We talk about the seller concessions. How much can they get from this? Can they pay 2% of my commission should we need to do that? Number one, do they have the finances to do that? Number two, can the loan support that? As we know, the VA loans, you never could pay any of that in a VA loan, and they did modify that. We'll see how long that actually stays in play. But you got to be able to have those conversations to understand that, because your buyer doesn't. They don't know. So that's part of your negotiation power, is that rapport with your vendor to understand what now you need to go back and actually do with a listing agent. Is it a seller concession that we put in right up front to say, okay, we're going to cover my commission through a seller concession, and here's how we're going to do it. They're going to, credit you at closing X dollar amount, and now you, Mr. Buyer, can separate that out however you choose to do that. We'll put that document in place at that point in time. So the key thing is the education, I think, and understanding all the different nuances here. I agree with you. Having that one little checkbox, don't put anything else there to confuse people and get them in trouble. Just say, are they offering concessions or not? Are they open to offering concessions or not? Check the box, yes or no. I think they took it out of Stellar because it did get confusing. There were way too many questions being asked. Too many agents were putting information in there that they should not have been. But I also think from the tone of the settlement, I'm thinking maybe they were on the mindset of this could be communicated or construed as commission if someone were to look at it.
Right, but
so they took it out.
Concession, it says concession, not commission, which are two different things. So
they really are.
Yeah.
But we know not everybody understands the same way. So it is challenging. And that's why I say it's going to take 6 months for us to wean through all of these questions and uncertainties, and before we actually get to that point of here's the new norm of how we're doing business. And I think a keynote on this, and I've had customers actually ask me this question, this is just a settlement right now. These aren't rules yet, because the settlement hasn't been approved by the court. It hasn't been stamped yet. That's
end of the year, right? December.
End of November is the date right now. I don't remember what date, but end of November. And there could be some slight changes that come. Could be. The court has that right to do that should they choose to. Do I think they're gonna? I don't. I think I think a court is going to be happy that they came to a settlement and that NAR is really pushing and supporting what they agreed to in that settlement. So at that point, then we can use the word rules. Once it's documented and registered, we can say, these are the new rules. Right now, they're not rules yet. They're just settlement statements of what we have to change.
Interesting.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it is. We'll see how it all pans out.
Say why you have to hire a realtor, because there's so much complexity to what we do that if you try to do this on your own, there's a lot of room for error.
Yeah. I mean, I think even if as a buyer you were to have to pay a buyer's agent commission. Like, let's say the seller doesn't want to pay it, but you really love that house. I think that money you're going to make up for getting a better deal on your house, right? Because you're just going to have someone that negotiates on your behalf, because we all know if you approach a listing agent, I mean, they just want to get the deal done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I get that asked a lot. Well, why would I pay you $10, $15, $20,000, whatever it may be, if I could just call the agent on Zillow? I'm like, well, the $10K you're going to pay me, there's a high probability you're going to pay more than that on the deal, because ultimately, as of right now, he or she just represents the seller. Transaction broker, then obviously, but
people don't understand that,
right,
single
yeah,
agent
so that's
versus
a whole
transaction
other
broker.
thing. But like,
right,
but
right.
So
like you just said, it's interesting because I have had people say, why wouldn't I just go to the listing agent then and work with them directly? What they don't understand is whose best interest now does that agent actually have at hand? It's the listing, not necessarily that buyer, because that buyer may not make an offer that's going to be realistic for their seller. And then what are they going to do? But they may get a buyer now to go off and look at something else. Still have to have, once they start representing that buyer, they need to have that buyer agent agreement. So that's a misconception that I've heard people say, well, if the listing agent has it, then I don't have to sign a BBA with them. Yes, you still do. If they're going to make an offer on your behalf, you have to sign that BBA with them. And now they have to be Switzerland.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're in the same boat, but you're represented by a transaction broker, not by a single agent. So like, which one would you rather have?
Right. Do you want someone like me, to be able to negotiate as best I possibly can to get you the best deal? And that best deal, what I tell people all the time is, may not be the best price, but it's the terms of that deal to get you the best deal at the end of the day to get you in that house. So it's interesting. It's, again, it goes back to educating the consumer of, you could go to them, but they're not going to negotiate the best deal for you. Whereas if you separate and decouple the listing agent from the buyer agent, you're going to have someone who's going to represent you so much better, in my opinion, than having someone who's got both sides of that deal.
Obviously, if you get sued or if you want to sue somebody, like, you wouldn't take their attorney to represent you as well. Obviously, that's a little different. And that would just be very weird. I mean, it's kind of it's like the same concept, right? So I agree. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out. But me personally, I think I see it as an opportunity. I hope that it weeds out some not so good agents, maybe, because I mean, Florida just feels like it's, and I've said this before and on this podcast as well. I think there should be a higher barrier to entry to get your real estate license, just because I mean, you can get in some hot waters pretty quickly, and you're oftentimes messing with people's whole savings, whether it be on the buyer side or in equity in their house on the seller side. And so I hope it'll kind of weed out some. And so
no, you're right. I'm hopeful of that same thing, because there are some really not so great agents out there. And, I met a couple 2 weeks ago, and, they were brand new to the area. They moved here from Kentucky, and they were complaining about the house that they just bought and the agent that they had. And, they started a conversation, and I said, well, what was so, bad about the agent that you had? And they said, we did a new construction build, and they showed up to sign the agreement so that they were my rep to get their commission. And I never heard from them until we saw them at the closing table. Wow. And to me, that's wrong. If you're representing them, you represent them through the entire transaction. I have a couple who moved from Colorado, and it took us 2 years to get them in their house. But I built that rapport with the builder, with the construction manager. We had weekly meetings as we started to get down toward the end of their construction. I went in and I did a blue tape across the entire place. The construction manager looked at me and said, put the blue tape away. Yeah. I get it. But even after we finally closed on that home, I still check in on them, and they'll call me and say, hey, this happened. And I'm like, yep, you need to call the builder, because you're still under warranty on that. So there's a lot of things that we do even after the fact when we work with someone and build that rapport and have that long-term relationship with them to be able to have them feel comfortable with us. And with the whole BBA, I believe it gives the consumer the ability now to say, I don't want to work with that agent, but I'll work with this agent because this agent is going to do more for me and be more communicative. And that's, I think, one of the things of building a long-term relationship with someone is setting expectations and making sure that both sides understand what each other's expectations are. If you're going to say you're going to communicate updates to them every Thursday, do it.
Yeah.
No matter what, put it on your calendar so that you're doing that, because you miss those dates, they're going to lose that trust in you.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting industry to be in, and there's a lot of agents that don't look at it that way. And I think back to the beginning of my experience, I think the business world helped me understand that.
Right. And then I guess, so you do, since we're on this topic of agents and other agents, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like your coaching business. What, I'm sure you work with new agents, seasoned agents, whatever it may be, but especially for new agents, because I think it's important to instill the right habits right from the beginning, right? What kind of top 3 pieces of advice would you have for a new agent that calls you or emails you and says, I want to join your coaching program? What are kind of the top 3 things you usually talk to them about?
Yeah. So first of all, with a new agent, I want to make sure that they understand some of the key things that they need to be putting in place to gain success in their business. So number 1 is, don't try to do this on your own. Being a solo agent, as we call them, until you actually have some deals underneath your belt. So having a mentor, having a coach, being on a team that is going to mentor you is really crucial for a brand new agent coming into the industry, because they're going to get real life experience from someone who's been doing it for a while, understanding the systems and why systems are important, understanding how to negotiate, understanding all of the paperwork documentation that needs to come into play. When I mentor someone, I have them shadow me so that they can see how I'm talking to someone. They can see how I fill out those documentation, an offer, a BBA, whatever it might be. When they have their first deal, I'm with them all the way through it to make sure that their questions are answered, that they can answer the questions of their customer that's on the other end. I always tell people, if you don't know the answer, then say, that's a great question. I don't have the answer for you right now, but I will get back to you, and get back to them, find the answer and get back to them. So that's, I think, the very first piece of it. Continuing to educate themselves is another key thing. And that's one of the things that I do when I coach someone. We role play on every aspect. We role play conversations. We role play filling out a contract, filling out an addendum. Why would you need that addendum and how would you fill it out? What's that wording? Speaking of wording and filling out addendums, we're not attorneys. So we have to be careful with how we do that. And if it's something that has never been done before, you need to make sure that you have an attorney review that and make sure that it is legal, because these are legal binding contracts that we're putting in play. Understanding when you have the contract and there's the earnest money that gets deposited. If the earnest money isn't deposited in that time frame that you've mentioned, technically the contract is now null and void because they missed a key component of that contract. Inspection periods, in and as is, we have X amount of days for inspections, and our buyer can get their money back without any questions asked. They changed their mind. Oh God, I don't like this house anymore. Or, hey, that AC or that roof needs to be replaced and it's just going to be too much. I don't want to go back and ask for money. They're just not going to give it. So those types of things. So understanding the terms of the contract, and the board associations have great trainings for all of that as well. So making sure that new agents are attending that training, and then having those conversations. I meet with my people once, twice a week, depending upon what they're wanting to do. I tell people I will match what you put into this business. If you put in 0, you get 0. If you put in 100%, you're going to get 100% from me, because I want nothing more than their success. And I want them to enter this business the right way. So how do you set up, like you talked about, we're accountants. How do you set up your systems to track everything that you have? You don't need to buy a huge database right off the bat, because you're just getting in, and there's association dues and NAR dues, and it's expensive. And every year you have to pay those dues. But how do you track that? How do you track your expenses? How do you track your mileage? So I work with them on that. I have a spreadsheet that I give them for tracking all of that. And that's just part of what I do for my people. Marketing tools, we talk about that. Social media, we talk about that. So there's a lot of aspects of running the business that I work with them on. I think one of the miscommunications about this as well is, or misunderstandings is, we're independent consultants. We don't get a W-2 from our broker. We get a 1099 at the end of the year. So all those expenses, everything that we do is on us. So how to make those smart choices so that you're not running yourself into the ground. Talk about lead generation, all these different things. I sat through a couple of different trainings with different brokers. When it's your sphere of influence, you got to go attack them. I don't do that. It's talk about what you do. Who do you know that might be interested in buying property? If you're from New England, like I am, send out posts or mailers up into that area. Hey, interested in buying in this area of Florida? Let's talk. So there's different ways to be able to do that and get leads. I know people hate Zillow. Zillow is what started my business when I started. And I did it for 1 year. I did 24 sales my first year.
Wow.
First year in the business. And then the second year was all referrals. I did 22 deals. And my average on every year over year is about 22 to 25 deals a year. And I'm happy with that. So you got to be able to set those goals for yourself and understand, how do you actually manage those, monitor, adjust, move forward. But there's a lot that I put into coaching or mentoring the people that I work with, because I want them to be successful and I want them to learn it the right way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great stuff.
Sorry, I rambled.
No, all good. To sum it up, I guess, and number one advice would be, find a mentor. Doesn't necessarily have to be a real estate coach per se, but someone that's been in the industry, maybe a team leader, join a team, just find some sort of mentor. Number two, practice with role playing, whether it be on the phone or addenda and contracts and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Third thing was continuing education and training.
Yes.
And then the last thing was, you do a lot of like one-on-one conversations and coaching based on their goals and where they want to get to and what they want to work on.
Yes. Yeah.
So good things. I would agree with all of that.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And then to wrap it up here, I know we're nearing the home stretch of the year. Q4 is upon us.
Yeah.
What are your goals here for the end of the year? Anything in particular that stands out? I know you said, we talked about goals and constantly knowing where you're at, reassessing, where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? So it sounds like you are a goal setter. So I want to know from you, what's on the list here?
Sure. So one of the things I do this part of the year is I start planning for the next year. So I start planning out events that I might be hosting or sponsoring. I start planning out social media posts that might be coming. So around the holidays, I also look at what my goals were this year and where I actually am at this point in time. And if I didn't meet them, if I'm not that far off, what am I going to do to get there? If I'm quite a ways away, okay, let's be realistic and reset that goal. And you figure out how I'm going to get there before the end of the year. As I said, we're getting into the slower part of the year. So a lot of this time of year, like November, December, is a lot of planning for me to get into the next year. What are my goals going to be? How am I going to get there? What are some of the marketing tools that I'm going to use? Pumping up my social media, which I've really started to do in the last month or two, just because I needed to do that. Being consistent in posting things. New technology that might be out there, what's working with the tools that I am using and what's not working. And if things aren't working, okay, now we need to reset that and maybe cancel those subscriptions and try something else. So that's a lot of what my planning is for the latter part of this year as we're moving into the fourth quarter. And then for myself, for one of the goals that I have for next year, of course, is continue to do my real estate business with my customers. I want to, my goal, like I said, is usually about 22 to 24 deals a year. So that's always going to be there. I always want to try and stretch it. So for next year, I'm looking at stretching that a little bit to see if I can actually get there. But also, I'm hoping to be able to bring on a few more mentorship programs with people, some new agents. So that's an area that I am going to focus some time on for 2025 with all the changes that have gone on. I don't even remember what the statistic is as far as how many agents actually enter this business each year. But we have, I mean, just in Venice, I think there's over 10,000 agents in that area. It's crazy the amount of agents that we have. But it's really trying to hit those newer agents because on average, after a year, 80% of those agents after the first year leave because they don't know how to be successful. So I want to try and change that percentage by coaching people. So that's another focus, one of my goals for next year.
Nice. I like it. Well, that's a perfect segue. Maybe we can help you get there with this podcast. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, whether it be for real estate coaching or, of course, buying, selling, investing. Of course, all your social media will be linked here in the description. But how can someone get in touch with you directly if they wanted to do so?
Yeah, I'm happy to help in all those aspects. So you can email me at LM as in Mary Newell, NEWELL, realtor @gmail.com. You can call me or text me at 978-273-4648. So I'm open to any of that communication and of course would love to help anybody that's looking for help.
Awesome. Well, Leona, it's been a pleasure.
Same.
Really awesome. I think we talked about some great points. Hopefully someone out there got something from it. I certainly did. I always do on these. Like you said, you never know everything, right? So I want to thank you for your time and hopefully we can cross paths soon again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
And that wraps up another insightful episode of the 239 Real Estate Roundtable Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussions and gained valuable knowledge to enhance your home ownership journey here in Southwest Florida. A big thank you to our incredible guests and of course to you, our listeners, for joining us. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you'd like to connect, feel free to reach out. You can find us on Instagram at @KevinTremmel_real estate, on Facebook at Kevin Tremmel Real Estate, or visit our website, kevintremmel.com. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback is crucial and we're always eager to hear from you. Until next time, this is Kevin Tremmel, your host, signing off. See you on the next episode.